The room was dimly lit. It was 1:31 a.m. on January 13, 2021, when Lisa Montgomery was declared lifeless. Her breathing ceased, the lethal drug coursed through her body, and the state of Indiana closed a chapter that had shaken the nation. Lisa was the first woman in almost 7 decades to receive this kind of sentence at the federal level in the United States. This fact, by itself, marked a grim milestone in the judicial history of the nation. But who was she before the headlines? Why did she do what she did? And what does her story tell us about the failures of the system that let her fall? This is not just a crime case. It is a story of neglect, of untreated mental illness, of extreme decisions made by a broken mind. And it is also the story of a victim who, in a tragic twist, became a perpetrator. We are not here to justify anything, but we are going to understand it. Because, as you will see, the life of Lisa Montgomery was an intricate web of pain and neglect that culminated in an act of horror incomprehensible to many, but that, upon close examination, reveals deep human wounds. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we must go back in time to a small and quiet town that suddenly found itself caught in a nightmare. Skidmore, Missouri, December 16, 2004. Bobby Jo Stinnett, 23 years old, was at home waiting for the arrival of a woman she had been talking to online. Bobby Jo, a young woman full of life and dreams, was 8.5 months pregnant and overflowing with excitement to share her experience with another rat terrier dog lover, her great passion. The meeting was set for that day. The anticipation in the air was almost palpable. But what Bobby Jo did not know was that this woman, whom she considered a potential friend or client, had another plan, a macabre and meticulously orchestrated one that would change her life, and that of many others, forever. Lisa Montgomery had contacted Bobby Jo by pretending to be Darlene Fisher on dog breeder forums. She faked a genuine interest in acquiring one, a facade of normality that hid a growing darkness. But behind that innocent message were weeks, perhaps months, of preparation. Lisa did not act on a sudden impulse. Every step was calculated. She had studied her victim, her home, her routines. She knew when Bobby Jo would be most vulnerable, alone, immersed in the tranquility of her home. This premeditation is a chilling detail, as it shows that the act was not a fit of uncontrolled madness, but the culmination of a disturbing plan. Around noon, Lisa arrived at the house. The seemingly normal atmosphere did not last. Only a few minutes passed before violence took over everything. The scene left by the forensic investigators was gruesome, something that would haunt them for years. Bobby Jo was strangled until she lost consciousness, a brutal act that left her defenseless. Then, with terrifying coldness, Lisa used a kitchen knife to perform a makeshift and brutal cesarean section. She removed the baby, a girl, and fled with her in her arms, leaving the young mother bleeding out on the floor. How can a human mind conceive and execute such horror? This question lingered in everyone's mind. When Bobby Jo's husband arrived shortly after, what he found was the beginning of his own nightmare. His wife's body was lying there. She was still breathing, a faint breath of life clinging, a last gasp of hope that would fade away. But not for long. Bobby died shortly after, and the news became national within hours. The story of the pregnant young woman, the cruelty of the crime, and the kidnapping of the baby captured the attention and outrage of the entire country. The search for the little girl and her kidnapper became a national priority, mobilizing authorities and keeping the public on edge. While the police began the frantic search, Lisa Montgomery was hundreds of kilometers away in Melbourne, Kansas, a small town unaware of the tragedy she had unleashed. There she arrived home and presented the baby as her newborn daughter. An elaborate lie with an audacity that puzzled everyone. She even called relatives to show them the girl, perhaps seeking to validate her fantasy, or simply to hide the truth with a veneer of apparent normality. No one suspected anything at first. The happiness and relief of a new mother seemed genuine in the eyes of those around her. But FBI agents were already on her trail. Technology, although incipient in some respects at that time, became a crucial tool. Thanks to online messages, to the digital trail that Lisa unknowingly had left, they tracked her connection to Bobby Joe. The fake profile, the exchange of emails, the IP address, every breadcrumb of digital information pointed inexorably to Lisa. The net was closing in slowly, but surely. The investigation was a testament to the perseverance of law enforcement, who worked tirelessly to unravel the deception and bring the perpetrator to justice. The next day, federal agents arrived at her house. The climax of the search. There they found her, with the baby in her arms. The contrast between the warmth of the false maternal embrace and the cold reality of the charges to be brought against her was brutal. Lisa did not resist. She did not scream. She did not cry. Her reaction was disturbing, a silence that spoke volumes. She handed over the baby without fully understanding that her world had just collapsed. It was as if a part of her was absent, already disconnected from the reality around her. This moment marked the end of her fantasy and the beginning of her long descent through the judicial system. The baby was returned to her biological family, safe and sound. A ray of light amid the darkness, a miracle that soothed part of the pain. The hugs and tears of relief from the Stinnett family moved the nation, but nothing could repair the void left by Bobby Joe. The joy of the baby's recovery was tinged by the deep grief of loss, and nothing would prepare Lisa for what was to come. Because although the baby had been rescued, Lisa Montgomery's fate was already sealed by the consequences of her actions, and the road to justice would be long and tortuous, full of complexities that would challenge public understanding. Lisa Montgomery was charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a federal crime, and her trial began in 2007. This would not be an ordinary trial. It became a stage where not only the facts of the crime would be debated, but also the intricate relationship between guilt and mental health. From the outset, her defense argued that she suffered from severe mental illnesses, including dissociative psychosis. The defense attorneys painted a picture of a deeply disturbed woman, a victim of circumstances that pushed her to the limits of sanity. Evidence of her childhood abuse was also presented, a history of trauma stretching from childhood, brain damage, and a long history of untreated trauma. There was mention of a pattern of sexual and physical abuse that began at an early age and persisted through much of her life, a life marked by violence and abandonment. The defense sought to show that Lisa was not simply a criminal, but a person whose development and mental stability had been irreparably damaged by years of suffering. These arguments, though powerful in their attempt to humanize the accused, would be confronted by the harshness of the evidence of the crime. But the jury was not moved. The brutality of the act, the evident planning, and the shocking nature of the baby's abduction overshadowed, for many, any consideration of the accused's mental state. The prosecution, for its part, adopted a direct and forceful strategy. They showed graphic images of the crime, detailing the scene and Bobby Joe's suffering. They emphasized the premeditation and meticulousness of the act, arguing that Lisa had researched her victim, planned their meeting, and executed the crime with calculated coldness. They claimed that Lisa knew what she was doing, that she was not out of touch with reality, and that she had carefully planned each step. For the prosecution, the sophistication of the deception and the brutality of the attack demonstrated that Lisa was fully aware of her actions and their consequences. In their argument, the pain and devastation of Bobby Joe's family were the center of the narrative, seeking justice for the atrocious crime that had been committed. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. The decision resonated throughout the country, and for many, it was a just verdict, the result of a system seeking to balance the scales of justice. For others, however, the verdict raised serious questions about the system's ability to deal with the complexity of mental illness in the context of capital crimes. The death sentence did not close the debate, but rather intensified it, marking the start of a new and prolonged legal battle. Lisa spent more than 13 years on death row at the Federal Medical Center in Carswell, Texas, a place where time seems to stand still and where the reality of the death sentence hangs over every moment. During those years, her mental health continued to deteriorate alarmingly, a process that, for her defenders, was irrefutable proof of her incapacity to be executed. She often talked to herself for hours, or wrote letters with disconnected and apparently meaningless messages. It was a reflection of a mind slowly unraveling, trapped in a labyrinth of incoherent thoughts and distorted perceptions. She was repeatedly diagnosed by independent experts as unable to understand reality. Multiple psychiatrists and psychologists evaluated her condition, and their reports agreed. Lisa was deeply ill. Her ability to understand the reason for her imprisonment and the imminence of her execution was limited, if not non-existent. Her mental suffering was palpable to those who interacted with her, and it became the central focus of her lawyer's relentless fight to save her life. Her attorneys requested a review of the case and presidential clemency, precisely on the grounds of her mental condition. They presented compelling arguments about the impact of her childhood trauma and the progression of her mental illness. On several occasions, psychiatrists claimed that Lisa did not understand that she was going to be executed or why. For them, executing a person in such a state was not only cruel, but also a violation of fundamental ethical and legal principles. They argued that the purpose of capital punishment could not be fulfilled if the condemned did not understand the nature of their punishment. The defense insisted vehemently, "We are not asking for impunity. We're just saying she's too broken to be executed." This phrase became a battle cry for those who opposed her execution, encapsulating the moral complexity of the case. They did not seek to exonerate her from the crime, but argued that her mental state made her ineligible for the death penalty. But the courts rejected every appeal. Time and again, despite the diagnoses and pleas, judicial decisions upheld the original sentence. The legal system, in its interpretation, considered that despite her mental problems, Lisa Montgomery was still responsible for her actions and therefore deserved the maximum penalty. Justice, in this case, leaned toward retribution, setting aside considerations of vulnerability and illness. And so, the countdown to Lisa Montgomery's final day continued its relentless march. January 12, 2021. Terre Haute Federal Prison, Indiana. The stage was set for an event that would be recorded in history. After a series of last-minute appeals which stretched to the very edge of midnight, the United States Supreme Court gave the green light for Lisa Montgomery's execution. The clock struck 11 p.m., the night before her death. Despite desperate legal efforts, despite pleas for clemency and arguments about her mental health, the machinery of capital punishment was already in motion, inexorable, unstoppable. Lisa was transferred to the execution chamber hours before the injection. The atmosphere was cold, clinical, impersonal. Every detail, every object in the room was designed for the efficiency and solemnity of an irreversible process. The guards did not speak much. The silence hung heavy in the air, interrupted only by the metallic sounds of doors and muffled footsteps. They knew that that night they would make history. They would execute the first woman in almost 7 decades under federal jurisdiction. A fact that would not only set a precedent, but also rekindle the debate about the death penalty in the United States. Her last meal? A Southern classic: fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet rolls, and a Coca-Cola. An apparently normal, almost mundane choice, in contrast to the extraordinary fate that awaited her. She ate little. She said nothing. The scene was desolate in its simplicity. Some reports indicate that she did not even seem fully aware of where she was, or the meaning of those last moments. Her vacant stare, her apparent lack of interest in the food, all suggested a mind that had already embarked on a journey to an unreachable place. Unlike other condemned prisoners, Lisa did not offer any final words. She did not shout, did not ask for forgiveness, did not declare innocence. She simply remained silent. A deafening silence that became her last statement, or perhaps the absence of any statement that could express the labyrinth of her mind. According to witnesses present, her face showed neither fear nor peace. There were no tears, no expressions of remorse, only an immense emptiness, as if her mind had left that body long before the lethal injection reached her heart. A grim metaphor for a life marked by disconnection and pain. At 1:31 a.m., she was declared dead. She was 52 years old. Her life, a cycle of abuse, trauma, and a horror act, ended in the stillness of an execution chamber, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a persistent debate about true justice. Lisa Montgomery's execution sparked a storm of opinions across the country and beyond. It was not a simple judicial act. It was a catalyst for a national debate about the morality of the death penalty, especially when it comes to individuals with such a well-documented history of mental illness and trauma. Human rights organizations, psychiatrists, activists, and even retired judges protested the decision to carry out the sentence. Their voices rose in a chorus of indignation and concern, pointing out what they saw as a profound system failure. They argued that Lisa was mentally incapacitated, that she had been a victim of decades of systematic violence, and that her punishment represented a failure of the system, not its triumph. For them, executing a person in her condition was a cruel and inhuman act, a demonstration of the system's inability to recognize the complexity of the human mind and the devastating impact of trauma. They believed that society had a moral responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, even if their actions had been reprehensible. Lisa's execution, in this view, was not justice, but a continuation of the cycle of violence that had marked her life. Even the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture intervened, asking for clemency on humanitarian grounds. The concern transcended the borders of the United States, becoming a matter of human rights at an international level. The global community watched closely, and the decision to proceed with the execution was criticized by many as a regression in the treatment of prisoners' rights. But others, including the victims' family members, insisted that the gravity of the crime could not go without the maximum penalty. The pain of Bobby Joe Stinnett's family was immense and undeniable, and for them, Lisa Montgomery's execution was the only way to obtain a measure of justice. They argued that Bobby Joe was also a victim of a system that did not protect her, and that her daughter was ripped from her mother's womb in an act of unimaginable cruelty. For the family, forgiving Lisa was to forget Bobby, an unbearable idea. Their perspective focused on the victim, on the suffering inflicted, and on the need for the perpetrator to be held accountable in the severest way possible. The country was divided, and in that legal and moral abyss, a broken woman was executed without even fully understanding why. This division of opinion illustrated the deep fracture in American society over how to balance retribution with an understanding of mental illness and trauma. Lisa Montgomery was not a monster in the one-dimensional sense of the word, nor was she a heroine. She was a woman who embodied the worst of what a society can allow someone to experience from childhood: abuse, abandonment, illness, oblivion. Her life was a series of accumulated tragedies, a downward spiral that began in her childhood and never found a hand to stop it. Reports about her early life reveal one horror after another: systematic physical and sexual abuse by authority figures and family members, a childhood stripped of innocence and safety, and an adolescence marked by dissociation and instability. These factors are not excuses, but they are crucial elements for understanding the mind that ultimately committed such an atrocious crime. That does not justify the crime. It is imperative to make clear that the harm inflicted on Bobby Joe Stinnett and her family is incalculable, and that Lisa Montgomery's act is inexcusable from a moral and legal perspective. However, it does compel us to ask, how many Lisas are still waiting? This question is a persistent echo that resounds long after the headlines fade. It urges us to look beyond the criminal act and examine the roots of human behavior. What do we do with those who commit atrocities, but have been victims of even worse ones since before they could speak? It is a heartbreaking paradox. Early victimization can, in extreme cases, lead to the perpetration of violent acts. Is it fair to execute someone who was already emotionally killed since childhood? This is the essence of the ethical and moral discussion surrounding Lisa Montgomery's case. If the function of justice is also rehabilitation, or at least understanding, how does the execution of someone who, due to severe trauma and untreated mental illness, is not able to fully comprehend the extent of her punishment, fit into that? Is it justice, or is it vengeance? The line between these two notions becomes blurred in such complex cases. For some, the execution was the culmination of a necessary legal process to punish a heinous crime. For others, it was an act of social vengeance, a way of closing a chapter without addressing the underlying causes of the tragedy. The answer to this question varies deeply according to individual beliefs and understanding of the role of justice in society. The case of Lisa Montgomery is not just another one. It is an open crack in the wall of American justice, a fissure that exposes the tensions between law, morality, and the understanding of the human condition. It speaks to us of a woman whose crime was atrocious, an act that left an indelible scar on a family's life and shocked a nation. But it also speaks to us of an entire life that was a cry for help that no one wanted to hear. From her childhood, Lisa was a victim of a system that did not protect her, a society that failed to recognize and treat her deep wounds. And while the world keeps turning, while the headlines disappear and social networks forget, there is a truth that remains suspended in the air, a painful lesson we must remember. The death penalty does not always execute the guilty in the strictest sense of the word. Sometimes, and this case is an eloquent example, it only ends what trauma began. The execution of Lisa Montgomery, a woman with such deep mental damage that her own grasp on reality was questionable, forces us to look beyond the surface of the crime and consider the labyrinth of factors that can lead an individual to commit incomprehensible acts. It is a call to reflect on the need for a justice system that is more compassionate, more informed about mental health, and more proactive in preventing trauma from childhood. Because ultimately, Lisa Montgomery's story is a somber reminder that the true cost of social neglect can be devastating, and that untreated wounds can, at their darkest, manifest in the most destructive ways imaginable. What other stories of complex crimes and their origins do you think should be explored with this same depth to understand not just the what, but also the why?